as we grapple with the child labor crisis in this country, and you have governors like Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas passing a law that removes paperwork requirements for children working for corporations under the age of 16. And that's all to ensure that young migrant children can work in the slaughterhouse overnight and the corporations not have liability. I mean, that's what that's for. Because, and a lot of those, especially migrant kids, in those instances, they're working so that they can survive, so that they can feed themselves and feed their families. And that's just a symptom of mass poverty, insecurity in this country that Republicans want to paper over and pretend doesn't exist. And that includes State Senator Steve Drazkowski from Minnesota speaking about a proposal in the Minnesota Statehouse that would provide free breakfast and lunch for all students in Minnesota.
Mr. President, I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that is hungry. Yet today, I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that says they don't have access to enough food to eat. Now, I should say that hunger is a relative term, Mr. President. You know, I had a cereal bar for breakfast. I guess I'm hungry now. That, to some, might be maybe that's the definition of the bill. I don't know. I didn't see a definition of hunger in the bill, Mr. President. But I think most reasonable people suggest hunger means you don't have enough to eat in order to provide for metabolism and growth.
Metabolism. The bill's author, Democratic Farmer Labor Senator Heather Gustafson, says it's estimated that almost 275,000 students in the state get free and reduced price school meals. She said another 18% of students who would be likely to qualify haven't submitted the necessary paperwork, but roughly 1 in 6 children are food insecure, is the quote. That means they don't know when and where their next meal will be available if they get one at all. He's never met but he's lying. But it's 1 in 6 Minnesota children.
There's all these headlines about this guy said, he's never met somebody, and it's like, does he not have object permanence? No, he's lying because he's a fucking demon. I want to say, like Michael Knowles talks about demon, like this sort of idea that you take food out of people's mouth to make them so compliant. Like, to be honest, that's the only like any sort of thing you describe as demonic pales in comparison to that, and that's what this is all about. Like, there's particularly after the pandemic, like nearly 500,000 people were food insecure because of this stuff, and the Republicans like to play their fucking violin about inflation as like, oh yeah, we really, and then all of a sudden people have all the food they need. So on the one hand, it's like, oh yeah, eggs are so expensive because they really give a fuck about that. Milk is so expensive, but on the other hand, no one's going hungry. Where's the people going hungry on that? Because they're lying about all this shit.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's a type of appeal that the idea of, well, I've never met a hungry person. Have you? Like, even though we have all this data, that's the main source of argumentation, within our media, especially within the political sphere, that people take people take that kind of anecdotal data as though it has some sort of weight. When Ben Shapiro tells you that it doesn't cost that much to feed a child, when, someone walks out and says, I don't see any, poor people in the state of Arkansas, and everyone cheers. It's like, yeah, it's pressure from the platform that they have for everybody who fits that description, who already belongs to their group, to just stay quiet and to not make a sound because, well, maybe I'm the only one, even though we have all these statistics. It's a light form of what people call gaslighting now, but it is just the false consciousness that has been inflicted on a neoliberal society where we all just have to suffer and presume that we're suffering in solitude and silence. It's like, because all we hear at the highest level from our politicians are like these vague anecdotes about how everything that they want to be okay is okay, and everything that they want you to be afraid of is happening right now. And we've been stripped of our ability to actually contextualize that with any real data, because that just becomes like white noise on our news. Like, oh, these are kids in poverty. Okay, but let me tell you what's going on currently with Hunter Biden.
Yeah, that's exactly
the one kid you should care about.
That is exactly such a good point, Brandon. The fact that this kind of rhetoric undermines social solidarity and allows for like right-wing social Darwinist policies to get promulgated around the country because everyone internalizes it as a personal failing of their own. Like that is just, anyway, nail on head.
And you know, like Minnesota, I'm sure this is the case in a lot of places, but this is very like stratified along like particularly like racial lines. So like I've seen numbers up to like 30% of white families experience in Minnesota food insecurity. If you go to any other demographic, it is over 50%. So that might explain a little bit why Steve Drazkowski hasn't ever met anybody because he's from rich white people. And like so much of, particularly the Republican Party in these states is just talking to rich, comfortable, insulated white people that really don't have any sort of problems besides how they can take food out of people's mouths.
Calling from a 475 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
How's it going? It's Jason from Minnesota.
Jason from Minnesota. I saw saw the Minnesota thing. I wanted to pick up your call for that reason.
Thank you. So I'm so fired up about this. I love you guys are talking about it. So I remember I actually grew up in Ohio, and I've lived in Minnesota now. I remember my dad getting laid off from a steel mill, and like I'm so like emotional about it. Like I hear this stuff. I remember the lunches I had. I remember the cupboards being empty, eating a peanut butter sandwich with cheese nuts. My mom couldn't even afford Cheez-Its. And then I grow up throughout my life, go through all this stuff. I'm a pretty progressive person. I live in Minnesota. I'm proud of my state. And I'm so freaking proud of our DFL politicians passing bills like this because I never want another kid to have to go through crap like that ever again just because their parent, like you guys say, can't be useful to the capitalist cause, right? And it's so important for these kids to get proper nutrition. It's such a no-brainer bill. And Minnesota did so well during COVID. They knew that kids, you know, when they were out of school, when the lockdowns happened, they literally put food in school buses, went to the bus stops, and like handed out food during the day because people are like, wait a minute, where's the only place these kids get fed? You know, and then when they came back to school, they had the great idea of like, wait a minute, just subsidize it all, right? And I think it might have been a federal thing too. And this bill is such a great idea in that let's not mean, I think, you know, Sam, I love how he beats it to death. Means testing is such a sham. Why means test it? Just have everybody get it. Because what if you're rich? What if you make $1 million a year? Fine. The benefit of this is that much smaller to you, and it's that much bigger to people that are in poverty. And it's so funny. What I love about stuff like this, you know, I'm active in the DFL. I was a delegate. I support it. What I like about this is because it makes Republicans actually argue against feeding children. You know, like put them in that position, you know, pass this stuff and put them in the position where they have to go, well, actually, you know, get Ben Shapiro to say, well, actually, like, well, actually what? Feed the kids.
Well, so, actually feeding kids doesn't help their hunger. That's a common misconception that like leftists have. If you feed kids, it makes them hungrier.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing.
If you give them mouth a cookie.
Well, their stomachs expand, right? And so then they get a taste for food. They get a taste for food handouts, and we don't want that in a country that wastes well over 100 billion pounds of food a year.
Well, and then you think about it too. Now the schools can plan better. Okay, I have X number of kids. I get X number of dollars per kid per year. Can you have better, economies of scale for sourcing food for the kids now? Because now like, well, are the kids going to buy us lunch or are they going to pack? Now they're going to go, well, I get X amount of number of money a year. Now I can plan better. Can we actually source better food for the kids? Yeah. And it's just better in so many different ways.
No, we should be, we should be spending a lot more than whatever the $3 that we spend for each kid. Like Ben Shapiro in that EL says, it's not even that good of food. We haven't even got to his response yet, where he said, like a lot of that food's wasted actually, and it's not even very good quality. It's like pay for good quality food.
Yeah. Yeah. And
if we gave these kids
is not wealthy. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if we gave these kids food, where's the money for cop overtime going to come from? It's you hate to say it, but if kids had food and school supplies in their schools, like Officer O'Reilly would not be able to drive around Boston in an APC tank. That's just the trade-off our society has made.
Right.
Our society has made, and this is this is why it's good that Black Lives Matter highlights these things. And when people get mad at them or try to associate the fact that this is a true statement with whatever goes on in their nonprofit, it's just it's not the same. Is that our lack of infrastructure spending, our lack of spending on children and other municipal stuff is directly related to our spending on both police and private prisons. Mm-hmm. And you might say that we don't live in the kind of society to where if we didn't give that money to police that we would give it to children, but certainly we do live in a society where we don't give that money to children and we do give it to police. And that tells us the kind of values that we have. We don't give it to the water treatment in our towns. We don't give it to the road repair people, the garbage men. We give it to the police, and we have them sit around and menace people, whether they are doing it on school grounds or just outside your local a bar establishment. And that's just those are just the trade-offs that America has made as a country that likes to believe that it's so full of inborn threats that it requires a militarized police force, and any amount of money you might give to the rearing of children or to social services is going to inevitably end up into the hands of the same people that those police are meant to be violently putting down. So what's the point? It's a very vicious cycle we have here in this society where why give kids stuff? They're just going to grow up to be criminals, right? And then we just have to give the police more money. We don't want smart criminals, right? It's just really.
Well, doesn't that go right along? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, doesn't that go right along with Matt was saying earlier around how hunger forces people to work? There's this mindset of I see what you're saying, Brandon, and I think it's kind of the same side of the same coin, where I wish Democrats even couch this in a sense of we want to feed kids, and not just to make them productive workers. I get it, but wouldn't we have a more creative, vibrant society if our kids weren't hungry at school and they felt safe? And wouldn't they be better at just being better people? And wouldn't that just make things better? Where we don't need this coercive vision of coercing people.
Right, but there's a whole class. There's a whole class of people invested in coercion.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is the Democrats also 100%. Represent the capitalist class, and Target doesn't want these people fed either, and yeah.
And and also remember what happened to Michelle Obama when she said you should eat apples at school. And obviously that's just that's a sort of an acontextual point, but they savaged her for saying your kids should eat vegetables at school. But the reality is the Democrats don't have really the best of intentions when it comes to education reform. They might be better at school reform, and they might be better at wanting your kids to get an apple at school. And that might make your kid better at learning in various ways. But the truth is, as a country, we need education reform. The entirety of a school or a reform as it pertains to education can't simply be located in the classrooms and the teachers and the various school lunches. It has to be a bucket of solutions that affects the entire community surrounding the schools. Our schools now can't just be little islands, little oases in a middle of a underserved ghetto or maldistributed location in an inner city where there's a food desert. And that's the only place you can get lunch. And I think that's where the Democrats stop too. They don't think of it as a whole social solution. 100%. So they can be better than the Republicans about it, but they don't necessarily fully embrace that these are interconnected things. Not having food at home, even if you did get fed at school, is still going to impact your learning. And so we have to give people food at home and give them food at school.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly why they come up short with this Silicon Valley Bank regulation too. We need to add regulation, but we need to also have public banking and things like that. And this moment right now, the right wing is attacking public schools on all sorts of fronts. And this is just a way to make sure public schools don't get increased federal funding for hunger, because that would bolster them as institutions. And we need to have we need to realize okay, are we going to actually do this public education thing or not? And we need to do it. But we're coming from a place where the Democrats, like 8 years ago or wherever, were still in charter school mode. So it's like.
But even with the school lunch program, like just during COVID, when we federalized this and we expanded school lunches, there was no bureaucracy. I mean, people report how school administrators found it a lot easier because they could just hand out free lunches as opposed to kids having to apply on a case-by-case basis and this paperwork being involved. But that's the limits of our current Democratic Party. They prefer that kind of system. They prefer COBRA to Medicare expansion. They want things to be more bureaucratic because then there are guardrails and there's like a barrier between that and universal programs in society structure. Yeah.
The biggest conceit of modern Democrats, the pragmatist whatever center, they think, oh, you went too far, we became whatever, too woke, no, us stopping short of these more, and for everything you guys have listed, are not crazy ideas. Let's just do it better. We stopped short and we lost people because of that.
People blame. No, I mean, definitely, you lose voters triangulating, and also you lose voters like saying you're going to do something and never delivering because people just like lose interest and they eventually get it. But people love to blame the woke thing. And you see a lot of that with like the Silicon Valley Bank and the ESG stuff. But that to me is like, that to me is like the Sam Bankman-Fried giving that like impromptu interview to that like Vox reporter going like, yeah, I just said all that woke bullshit because it's what people want to hear. And like, that's basically why my company failed. And it's just like, no. Your company failed for the various reasons that all of these, like, for the fraud reasons and Sam Bankman-Fried. But, when you see people blaming woke politics for the failure of companies or the failure of political parties, there, you usually only have to scratch the surface very like gingerly, maybe give it a little blow before you think, oh, here's all the fraud, here's all the self-dealing, here's all the corruption, here's all of the consultants being paid hundreds of millions of dollars every year to understand, like, that there's no wokeness other than the veneer that the language gives you. Everything else is just the same old that other companies are doing and that fail like left and right.
All right, well, we got to jump, Jason, but I really appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Great
show.
Yep. Thanks so much.
I mean, would really be my favorite thing to talk about every single day. And it'd be nice to have a Democratic Party and shout out to the Minnesota Democrats for making it an issue because, you see the freak out that happens when it does. But it's like, compared to this versus like people being fed versus the fucking Twitter files.